Hello!
Hello. Can everybody hear me? Please type in the chat if you can hear. Yes, yes. Okay, I see all good yeses. Great. Well, welcome everybody to Museums Alaska's very first webinar.
Yay!
Thank you guys for being here and kind of being our guinea pigs for the very first time that we're doing this. I'll introduce myself. My name's Stella Hall. I'm the Executive Director of Museums Alaska. I guess they can't see my slide right now, can they?
Well, I will turn off the video.
We're going to turn on the slide so I can share some information with you. Okay, I think they can see the slide now.
Okay, good.
So I also wanted to just take a moment to thank the Alaska State Museum. This project is supported by a grant in aid, and it is also a partnership with the Western Museums Association. So thank you to both of those organizations. It's a 4-part webinar series that we're doing. Oh, Malia says she can't hear. Oh, she can hear. Okay, we're fine. Sorry. And so we have a couple of webinars coming up. I did just confirm the digital photography webinar will be in March. And so information about that should be coming out in the next week. Then we will have another one in May with Nicole Peters about storage and mounts, and another one in June about outdoor sculpture and artifact care with Ellen Carley. So information about those will be sent in an email and also on that link there that you can see on our website. Let's see, so you are all already using the chat feature, so that is where we would like you to ask your questions. There will be a couple of times where you might be asked to respond to a question that Angie may ask you, and so you can also type your answers there in the chat, and we will help make sure everybody can see those and hear those. And I will be sending you an email afterwards with a couple of attachments of recording of the webinar and some examples that Angie will be sharing with you. And also a survey. We would like to know how these webinars went, and we're kind of, since this is a grant project, we want to be able to share how well it went and what people liked and didn't like, so we can improve for the future. So please respond to that survey. And I think that's all the fun things I had to say. The last thing I get to do is I get to introduce our presenter today, Angela Lynn. Angie is a longtime Museums Alaska member. She is a prior board member of Museums Alaska and served in numerous leadership positions, including the Museums Alaska board president. And she's also a very good friend of mine. And she's going to introduce herself professionally. And so I will just thank you for being here, Angie. You can take it away.
Great, thank you. Well, I am really thrilled to be the inaugural presenter in this new webinar series. It's super exciting, and it's a really great way that we can partner with Museums Alaska and the Western Museums Association. I'm currently a board member of WMA and on the I think it's Programs and Innovation Committee, and that's the committee for WMA who has been helping out. So my thanks first is to Museums Alaska for hosting the webinars and for being patient with me and as we've worked through some of the little hiccups. Thanks to, echoing the thanks to the State Museum for the Grant and Aid program that I hope everybody is taking advantage of that funding. We should use it or we will lose it. So make sure that we continue to support that program and talk to our legislators about the value of that program. And again, to Western Museums Association for partnering with us and to help for helping us come up with topics for the series and presenters who can help provide the content. That's one of the things that we're really excited about with WMA is how to provide year-round content to members, both for WMA and for Museums Alaska outside of the conference. And that's, you know, a new way of showing value for the membership that we all pay for those different organizations. So we hope that everybody fills out the survey after the presentation. And I'll thank you in advance for your patience as we go through this process. A Zoom webinar, this is the first time I've participated in a Zoom webinar, and we'll hopefully all the questions that you will present us with and the great suggestions that you will share with us in the survey after the fact. We really hope that you provide that honest feedback, what you liked, what was challenging for you as you listened and participated, how we can make this a more engaging process for you as attendees, because that's really what it's all about. So without further ado, here we go. So I just wanted to give you a quick note about who I am and why you should even care about anything that I have to say. But I've got a long history working in Alaska museums, mostly based here in Fairbanks at the UA Museum of the North. Here I take care of about 17,000 objects in the ethnology and history collection, and I work with 10 other collecting departments at our museum. Those range from natural, cultural, art history collections. And we've got about 2.5 million objects and specimens between all of those different collections. So it's a pretty diverse place to work, and people who have lots of different backgrounds and experiences in museum studies and their academic disciplines. So it's a great place to continue to learn and grow. I started my Alaska Museum career volunteering at the Anchorage Museum back in 1994. And that's where I met Monica Shaw and got my hands on my first experience with Alaska-based museum collections. And before I got up here, I worked mostly with archaeological collections. When I was at the University of Iowa, I worked with the Iowa State Office of Archaeology and the Iowa Museum of Natural History and the Old Capitol Museum at the University of Iowa. So the vast majority of my experience has been in Alaskan collections. So today's webinar is about inventories and checklists, and I'm going to start with checklists because it's the thing that I'm most passionate about. As a lot of us in collections, we find ways to make things more streamlined and straightforward, and checklists and templates are some of the ways that I've been able to really streamline my collection management activities. One of the challenges that I have here at the UA Museum in the North is that all of our collections-based workers are almost entirely students and volunteers. Our student employees can only work about 20 hours a week during the academic year, and the students who get to enroll in our museum research apprenticeship program, which is something that's kind of new over the last 5 or 6 years. They get to take a class, get course credit, but they only work between 3 or 6 hours per week. So that's not a lot of contact time in the collections. And then of course, volunteers who we're lucky enough to have. A lot of times those are students who've graduated, they're retired teachers, spouses of military personnel, things that probably everybody here is familiar with as well. And, we're lucky to get maybe 5 or 6 hours a week out of them as well. So like a lot of you, checklists are handy when you've got students or volunteers who are coming through, helping you out in your tasks just for a few hours each week. This is a great way to develop these systems to help keep you informed as the supervisor where everybody's at in those different processes. Some of these checklists are really good for those repetitive processes. Some of them are really good for tasks that you might not do very often and you need to be reminded of all the various steps. So that's how I have kind of looked at the various checklists and templates that I've developed over the years. I use form books. I just write down the various steps that I follow in those assorted processes that I follow. And then I pull from manuals like the Museum Forms book, which I just told Della about a couple of weeks ago, and she was very excited to see. Certainly a resource that we can share with you guys. I think it's out of print. The last one was from 1999 when I first started, and I've been hoarding it in my office, but we're certainly happy to share that reference. You can sometimes find used copies online. And then of course the MRM5, the Museum Registration Methods, 5th edition, which all good collections managers and registrars should have within an arm's reach. And then the National Park Service Museum Management Handbook. This used to be just a set of paper copy books, these huge binders. They've put these binders now online, and these are great resources that people should be aware of. And just Google that. If you can see the URL up there, it's pretty straightforward. NPS.gov, Museum Publications Handbook. So check those out when you're developing these things. You know, people have gone through a lot of work and time to create these checklists. You really don't need to reinvent the wheel. Find these formats and then customize them to your own processes. And then, of course, we've got this Connecting to Collections is a project that is run by a number of different funding resources, but you should check out this resource. It's a handout that has other forms. I think they did a webinar a couple years ago on, I think it was called There's a Form for That. So that's a good resource that people should know about as well. So the checklist that I'm going to take us through today is sort of my checklist of checklists. It's the master checklist for a lot of the processes that I go through, and sometimes I'll use forms that, you know, independently of this process, but this particular checklist utilizes other templates that I've created to work myself through this whole process. This is a snapshot of that checklist. And it's just a Word document that I created and saved as a custom template. If you need to know where your computer hides those custom templates, let me know after the fact, and I can walk you through on a Mac. I don't know where PCs hold them, so Della might be able to provide some assistance on that, or if you have an OIT person available, they can help you with that as well. And what this checklist does is it just lists the key steps in the acquisition process for our museum, and particularly for my collection. And I use this as a hard copy, but it could also be filled out electronically if I wanted to. And I print this out and put it into action as soon as I get a serious offer. So, and I developed this one specifically because I do have these students and volunteers helping me out in this process, and they come in and out of the steps throughout that process. And so it's a great way to literally check the box as I accomplish each task, fill in the date, and put the initials of who actually completed that task. So I'm going to walk you through this entire process, and definitely, you know, throw questions in the chat screen if you have questions about things as we're going through them. As I said, you're going to see a lot of the other templates and checklists that I've created through the years as I go through step by step. And after the webinar, Della's going to have a packet of PDFs of all of these forms that you see in this presentation. And you're welcome to take those and run with them. And if you want the Word versions of them after the fact too, so you don't have to completely recreate them, just let me know, and you can drop your own icon in there or your logo for your institution and adjust it to your own processes. But the structure is already there if you like it. So, you know, this is, as a collections professional, you know, we are particular about certain things, and this process is one of those things that I'm quite particular about. When I start this process, I print a hard copy of this form. I attach it to a green folder. Only green folders are used for acquisition proposals in my world. Nothing else ever goes into a green folder in my world. I use Post-it notes to put the information on there with the temporary number and the basic information. And that way I can just keep using these folders over and over again. This form stays with the collection as it migrates from the proposal to the acquisition, the final accession folder, and becomes part of the permanent record. And I'm considering scanning that and adding it to the acquisition or the accession file in our database as well as media. So it's all about our paper trail, right? So the first step one, when I get a series proposal from someone, whether it's a phone call, they show up at the front door, they send me an email, I print this out and I create a temporary number. So I will write the number in the column here. This is just a blank register book, accession ledger. It just has lines. I add the columns and I run through. And so it's just a sequential numbering system here. I use a T for a temporary number, and I use a period instead of a dash and a UA, which is what our normal accession numbers are. So that way, if I see this number written down somewhere, I don't confuse it with a real number. And in this ledger, this handwritten ledger that's bound, so you can't insert or remove pages, that's important, and I write it in permanent ink. I can just record that basic information from that proposal. This can also be incoming loans. If you don't do a lot of incoming loans, you can see that one of my temporary numbers was a loan, an incoming loan from someone, and we ended up turning that into a repository agreement. So that did get an accession number. And so I can write those in the last column and kind of keep track of where I'm at in the process. If it was accepted, we sign an MOA on that one. This one was rejected. So this is just a good way. It's a really simple and straightforward way to keep some basic information. And I've been doing this for about 7 years in this book now, and it's been working out pretty well. I feel like I'm much more organized in terms of this process now. So step 2, we go into the database, and in our database we have what's referred to as collections. And so this is our online database. There are 3.5 million objects and specimens in this database, and there's about 16 different institutions that use Arctos now. And so everybody has a collection name and a code. And so the UAM, normally our permanent collection is UAM:EH. This is for observation, and the other collections at our museum, like mammals and plants and insects or sciences, they use this observation collection to record information about observations of biological creatures that they've seen out in the wild, but they're not physically collecting. It's just a way of documenting the sort of ephemeral presence of things. And so I've taken this into a cultural context and I'm using it as a way to track that ephemeral status of a donation proposal. And so these records will stay in Arctos. They get backed up like our regular accession data. And so if I lose my green folder for something, I at least have this basic information recorded in the database. It has a remarks field like our regular accession. It has the agents that are connected through the agent table. And I can keep track of the status of the proposal right here as well. And so that's the first step, is entering that into the UAM observation accession. My step 3 would be to complete the preliminary justification form. And that is the form that goes to our acquisitions committee. And they use that as the basis of making their decision whether something should go into the collection. This is, again, just a Word template. This form is going to look really familiar. The header and title and basic form. These are mostly tables that I use because it helps to keep everything nice and straight. The cells will expand naturally as you add more content. So that's a really handy tool. You can show grid lines. You can make little boxes by making the borders in certain areas. So, Word tables are super handy, and they're not as fidgety sometimes as Excel tables and columns and rows can be. So I have really embraced Word tables for my checklists and forms. I really like them. And then, of course, you can turn these into PDFs once they're filled out, or you can make them a PDF form in Acrobat, Adobe Acrobat, and fill them in as a form. So there's different ways that you can handle this from the kind of back end of the form itself. So we make this form, we send it out to our acquisitions committee, and I use this to justify, why we should take something. All the images will be included with this, and then when we are ready for the committee to review this, this gets emailed out to them. The committee will review everything before the meeting, and then when they come to the meeting in person, they will be prepared, and you know, sometimes we'll have 5 or 6 of these for each department, and so it's super handy to send these out as a big packet, and so people can really feel informed. When we're at the in-person meeting, we have an evaluation form. Again, this is the Word template in a table format, and we've got some signature lines down here for everybody. You can transfer that temporary number over here, which is the proposal number, which collection we're dealing with, some basic elements that we want to use as our criteria, and then any discussion items that came up in the meeting that are important for backing up the decision that was made by the committee, whether to accept it, to accept with contingency, or to reject it. That can be recorded here. Again, I fill this out in hard copy by hand, and then when the decisions are made at the end of the meeting, the paper goes around the table, everybody signs, and you've got a really nice hard copy thing that stays in the accession file as part of that permanent documentation. Now, if folks are not able to meet together, often, as we all know, in the summertime, it's hard to get these committees together. I've developed a Google form for voting, and I use Google Drive to deposit all the proposals, include a link up here in the top of the form. So you link right to the proposals, and then people can fill out this Google form, and I include the temporary number, who the donor is, or the proposer, what the item is, whether it's a donation or purchase, and then my recommendation. And that's really just to kind of jog people's memories as they're going through this form. They can check accept, reject, or other, and then put an explanation and any comments that they want to be included on that form. This Google then creates a spreadsheet, and it timestamps everybody's submission. You can actually set these forms so that when somebody submits their form, they can go back and see everybody's comments if you have a particular comment section at the end. And that's a really handy tool to provide an opportunity for a little bit of dialogue with your committee when this is, you know, a very insular kind of process. It's, you know, you don't get those dialogues that you get at an in-person meeting, that back and forth. But this can allow people to enter their comments for particular pieces, and then just provide some from general feedback at the end of it. So that's really handy. And then I use that timestamp on my evaluation form. When I fill this out, then I just write the person's name and then the timestamp of when they submitted their vote. And so it mimics kind of the same process of filling this out by hand in the meeting. So the next step we'll just review really quickly then. So here's the partially completed proposal checklist. You can see that the offer came in over email, so I don't have any objects, and that's often how we work these days. I'm sure everybody has a no drop-off donation policy for their museum, and so we often are getting these emails and phone calls from folks outside, and rather than having them send something that your committee might not end up approving, we just work pretty much off of digital photos these days. And so we make sure that people send really good photos and shows the condition. They provide good background information. And so you have that conversation with them either over the phone or through email to get all that good background information for justifying that proposal. If it's not accepted, then, you know, we go through, we check it. Then we send an email to the person saying why. If they have dropped off the objects, then we can return them along with their temporary custody form, and then that material gets filed into a general accession committee folder for that year. And so that goes into one place. But if it's accepted, then we go on to the next step, which is getting some objects in. And so we will complete our temporary custody receipt. So that is our next form that we'll have. Okay, so step 6 right here, temporary custody receipt. So we will get that number from the binder or from our ledger, and we'll get all the contact information in there. We'll sign it all. We'll have a good description of what it is. and we'll get that person to sign that form. That's really important and date it. So that's your first, that's your offer and your transfer of custody from the donor. A lot of times what I do, rather than running down the hall to the copier, I'll just take a picture of that temporary custody receipt with my phone, and then I can just print it out and put that in the paper file. If somebody is sending it from afar, I will fill it out on the computer, add my signature line here, and then just send it to them. And then I've got the copy that I created on my computer. So if we've got the objects now, the next step on our list is to freeze them. And we're lucky enough to have a fumigation or pest control room, we call it, right off the loading dock. And so we've got 2 ultra cold freezers in this room, a chest freezer and an upright, and some shelves for holding stuff, because when you've got 10 other collections that are processing things, plus our education department, plus our store cycling things through the freezers, you have to wait your turn. So wrap everything, label it, put it in the freezer, and those things get frozen. And these are set at -50, so those are in there for 72 hours. That will take care of any of those little critters that might be in there. So we record that in our temporary custody form as well, or in our checklist. So while everything's in the freezer, then we take those 3 days to do some file work. So at this point, the committee has agreed that we're going to take this stuff, so our green folder can now turn into an archival paper file. And our accession files in my department hold all the information about the collection, including all this paperwork that we've talked about so far, all the printouts of any emails or written correspondence, letters, photos that we may have shared between the museum and the collector. And so I will take everything out of that green folder, put it into the archival folder, get a hanging file folder for that, and then put that into our file cabinets in our lab. Now, this is one of those things that I'm very particular about in my world. I like to be able to visually see immediately what accessions are for each year. So everything gets a beautiful little nicely spaced, evenly spaced tab on the side with the accession number, the donor, and a really brief description of what's in that collection. It gets a paper folder with all that information, and the same tab placement for each year, so that you can see those are all the 2014s, those are 2015, there's 2016, there's 2017. So when I see one of these tabs popping up out of alignment, that really works my collection manager irritation. So this is just a great way to keep things really visually clean and keep everything organized. And so all those things are going into the paper file and nicely recorded. The other thing that I like to do, and I started doing this a number of years ago, in that plastic tab, when I prepare a deed of gift or the paperwork that goes to the donor, I slip these little colored tabs into that clear tab. So I put in a yellow and a blue. So when things are in-house, I'm preparing the paperwork, it's to my director collecting signatures, the tab looks green. As soon as that paperwork goes out to the donor, I pull the blue one, so now it looks yellow. When that paperwork comes back, I pull the yellow tab, and so now I've got a nice clean view of fully completed paperwork files. If I see a yellow one in there, I know that I need to get that deed of gift back from the donor, so I send them a reminder letter. If I see a green one, that's a sign of something else gone wrong, and I won't go into why that particular one is green. But this is, again, just ways that you can visually make your world a little bit easier. Okay, once that paper accession file is created, I can create an accession record in the database. So I've got my temporary accession number over here for that proposal, and then that gets migrated over to the UAMEH collection, and it gets its real accession number, and most of that other information gets transferred directly over. I can show that this was accepted under a particular temporary number in that new accession, and then keep track of, again, the process, and when everything comes back, I get it all recorded in there. we add permits in there. And so we use the blanket deed of gift as our general permit for collecting. And that's something that's just particular to our collection, our database, because we work with a lot of biological collections where they have to have collecting permits. And so that's one of the things that we can keep in our accession record. And so that's our next step. That's step 9 for creating that accession in the database. Now, once objects come out of the freezer after those 3 days and they've thawed fully for 24 hours and have been opened up and laid out in the lab, we can start that process of cataloging into the online database. So a number of years ago, before we were in Arctos, and before I created that master proposal checklist, I used this checklist, which was my object worksheet. And I used that for having my students hand fill out the basic information. Sometimes you'll get a volunteer or student, less so with students, but sometimes if you've got a retiree, they're not super comfortable with entering stuff directly into the database, or you may have a process in your museum where you are the only person, or your registrar is the only person who records information directly into the database. So you can create a worksheet like this that allows a lot of different people to work on that cataloging process, but the for posterity information that goes into the database that everybody sees, that can be controlled by the full-time staff person. I don't have the ability to do that here with thousands of objects coming in every year. And so we train our students really well at the beginning. We do quality control checks during their first few days on the job. When they're entering that information, our database system requires me to approve all those records before they get uploaded into Arctos. So they create the records, they do the data entry, then I approve it, and then they go live. And so then I can go in and easily fix anything, spot checking. But if you have a process where you're just starting to database your collections, or you have this control over your database and you want to really control that content, you can use a worksheet like this for your individual objects. And you can see this is where a lot of those little checklist things came from originally. And I transferred this process into my big master checklist. So then when we do our direct data entry right into the database, this is our catalog record view in Arctos. And so part of that process after entering data is to take digital photos and upload those. You can see this one has 3 different images in there. We add additional information. We track the place, date, and remarks associated with the place of manufacture, and use, and collection. And so those have to be added after the fact. We can only data entry just one of those. So we'll do all of that stuff after they've been uploaded, and those tasks are part of our checklist as well. And that digital photography, if you want to know more about digital photography, be sure to sign up for the webinar that Museums Alaska is going to be doing in next month on that. So be sure to keep an eye out for registering for that. So step 11 is our deed of gift, or our donor paperwork. And this is something, can be considered a legal document. So you should have all of the small print reviewed by folks at your institution. But again, this is just a Word document. We used to have these printed out, in triplicate in the old days at our museum, and a different color for, a different file. Now, you can fill this out all by hand. You can fill it all by computer. We send out 2 hard copies of the deed of gift along with a donor questionnaire. And this was the first form that I actually stole from one of my colleagues, Amy Steppian at the Alutiiq Museum. When I went there in 1999, I was like, wow, you've got all these great templates. And so that was my first case of learning to share from and ask for help from one of my colleagues. And so she shared a bunch of the different forms that they use, and it continues to be a great form that you can send to your donor, and then you get all that language from the donor in their own words. So I send this paperwork, 2 copies of the deed of gift, the donor questionnaire, the thank you letter, a note from the director, and a self-addressed stamped envelope, and send that whole packet out to the donor. That can take about 1 to maybe 4 weeks for that stuff to come back to the museum. As a result of that, I've been piloting the use of a digital deed of gift. I'm calling these e-deeds. And so I've been, when I correspond with a donor, to let them know I'm getting ready to get their deed of gift, confirming their address and credit information, I ask them specifically whether they'd prefer a hard copy to come through the mail that they can sign and return, or if they would like to sign their paperwork electronically. And the university signed up for this service, DocuSign. I think they have nonprofit discounted versions for your nonprofit. So, if this is something that you are interested in using, there's a lot of talk about sustainability in museums. We generate a ton of paperwork in museums. And so this is one way that we can reduce our impact on the environment. You can see that the university has reduced carbon emissions by 312,000 pounds by using DocuSign instead of sending out, these things and running through the mail. This can be generated the exact same way. You create your same deed of gift in Word, then you upload this to DocuSign, you set your signing fields and the contact information of the person. You can either import your custom signature, that's my real signature, or you can use one of the standard fonts that they include in there. It automatically puts in the time code for the date if you set that. You can add fields. So I had added this one. If they want to change the credit line, you can set that as a text box with a hint that will show up. They can add information, correct it. And in the time that it took me to upload this and send it out, and then I was working on 2 other deeds of gifts, I had all 3 electronic deeds of gift back to me before I even had those hard copy packets packed up, copied, and put into the mail. So this is an amazing way of streamlining your workload when you're dealing with a stack of deeds of gift. We have maybe 20 to 25 donations every year. And so that's money that we're saving in postage. And that's certainly a carbon footprint that we're reducing through not sending all that stuff through the mail and using all that paper. And I found that some of my donors actually really appreciate the simplicity as well as that environmental impact that these e-deeds are having over the hard copy. So right now it's great. We deal with people of all technical abilities. And so certainly we're going to have a lot of those mostly older people who like to have that hard copy and sign it and put it in the mail. But I encourage people to look at this as an option. And by using a service like DocuSign, rather than just like sign this in preview or something, this is an actual certified signature. This is a legally binding and IRS approved form of signing things. So this is just as good as having a real signature on there. So I encourage people to look at this as an option for the future. Okay, so back to our checklist. You can see we've done all of these tasks at the beginning. We have moved into our donor communications. We've got all of our computer work done over here with our accession records and our catalog records, adding locations. We've had our donor correspondence with our deed of gift sent and received. If there was a copyright agreement that we had to manage through that deed of gift, we've got that taken care of. We've got our donor questionnaire. And then the final steps on our checklist are those tasks that sometimes end up taking a lot of time, making that storage mount, labeling the objects, cleaning the object, taking it into its location and assigning that location, entering that information into your database, and then any final reports that get printed and put into the file. So that concludes the master checklist that really shows a lot of what we do. I'm going to just quickly go through that second big checklist that I use for a task that I don't do very frequently, which is outgoing loans. And this one is one that I created this because as I said, I don't do very many loans, maybe 1 or 2 outgoing loans per year. And so there's a lot of steps, and I pulled a lot of this from the Park Services checklist for outgoing loans. And so I figured they're a pretty good authority on what kinds of paperwork need to be placed in there. And so, so this one was really handy. And so I rely on this one quite frequently because, as you know, you may have a long turnaround for some institutions that are really planning well, and sometimes you have a very short turnaround time. Oh my gosh, we've got this exhibit and it's opening in 2 weeks, and we really need this last item to fill this gap. So having a checklist helps you work through that streamlined process. So really, it's the same kind of thing, and this is literally the only slide I'm going to show you about this. It's the same format. It gets a hard copy. It gets filled in. And again, you think about what are all the steps that you follow at your institution for doing an outgoing loan, who has to approve it, what processes are automated in your database, what processes do you have to use through your own custom forms that you've created, whose loan agreement are you using, what are the things that that borrower is requiring. And then, you know, you'll have this form once you ship it. Of course, you get to this line down here, and then you're going to sit around for a while it's on loan, and then it comes back, and you have a couple other steps that you're going to follow once those things come back. So again, this is an important document that goes into the loan file, along with all of those other pieces of paperwork that we generate, whether it's a facilities report, the loan agreement, all the correspondence between the shipping information, the condition reports, copies of that, all of that stuff, the certificate of insurance, that's all really important information. And using a checklist like this allows you to really keep track of all those complicated steps. Okay, so that's the big two that I use a lot. And like I said, I generate these in Word. I have used the museum forms book to create these. And I just wanted to throw out our first poll question for you about custom forms. How many of you have created any of these custom forms for your own work? So if you can just answer this poll for us, if you've created custom forms. I'm going to vote here also. Can I vote? Oh, I can't vote on that one. So hopefully everybody sees a little pop-up, creating forms.
Okay, I see 8 out of 12 of you have voted. We'll give it another 5 seconds. Okay, and I will close the poll now.
All right.
Oh, they can't see
it.
The
Can't
results.
see
Oh,
it.
there, I
show the results. There we go. So we can see that 8 of you have created those forms. So using the chat view now, can you just list out some of the custom forms and checklists that you've created that have been helpful, so that we can kind of do a little share out here? And you can see on my screen here, this is just a view of some of those random checklists that we use, or templates that I've created over the years. So we've got Anjali has shown for acquisitions. What else? There's 8 of you out there. Let's see what you're typing in there. Deed of gift, yep, thank you. Field verification form and acquisition form. Okay, Lindsay, explain to us what your field verification form is, maybe. Temporary checkout form, that's great, yeah. Deed of gift, temporary custody, in and out for acquisitions. Oh, for a botanical garden, great, thank you. Okay, anybody else? So a lot of those, yep, acquisitions, deed of gift, temporary custody, super. So these are the kinds of things that we all are doing pretty regularly. So that's a real standard one. You can kind of see in the back of my screen here, I've got, outgoing loan, condition reports. So a template that I can use for condition reports, loan renewals. If you need to send out a loan and, you want to keep that loan for a little while, here's my standard checklist for renewing that loan. I've created things like performance appraisals for my students or staff. You can, if you have other departments at your museum, like exhibits, you want to create a work request. So, you know, you want your exhibits department to pull something off the exhibit for you. We do that with our preparador. If you want to create an advertisement in the paper or something, you can request some work from the communications or your marketing. If you want to work up a product in the store, maybe you want to bring in a product into your store, and you can develop a template for that. So those are some of the ones in the museum forms book that that we have found, and it's just it's a great tool. So so that is the main thing. I just wanted to kind of walk you through just some screenshots of some of the other forms that we use. The artifact report form. You know, sometimes you have an object that gets damaged, or heaven forbid you find something that's missing or was stolen. So having a standardized form that you can just check off the boxes and put it in the file so that it's a standard process, you know, you can put that in the file. Deaccession and disposals, you know, we're not, probably a lot of people aren't doing a lot of deaccessions. As we get deeper into our curation crisis over the years, we may all have to be doing more deaccessioning and fine tuning of our collection. So having, you know, for a process like that, it's super important to have that fully documented and really nicely organized. So you should absolutely have a deaccession and disposal form that aligns with your collection management policy and your code of ethics to make sure that you're doing everything properly, legally, having all the forms, the boxes checked and the lines signed. So that's a really important one. We, you know, heaven forbid you get infestation, but, you know, we've got a lot of things coming and going from our museum, and bugs come in on people and things. So, you know, every now and again, you're going to get an infestation. And so whether you're monitoring for infestation or you've found an infestation, having a good form to report that in your paperwork is another great checklist that you can have. And these are the types of pests that we would typically find in Alaskan collections and the kinds of infestation you might come across, and then your standard control measures. So this has been a really important one for us as we've dealt with infestations over the years. A transfer agreement, I think somebody mentioned that on one of their forms that they use. So this is, you know, if something comes into you and you're gonna transfer it to another department, or you're sending it out to another unit of your organization, you can use this. We sometimes, before we accession things, or somebody donates a bunch of stuff and we only want part of it, some of it's going to go to the education department, we'll use something like this that we transfer it to education, and it can go into their hands-on collection. So this is, you know, it's sort of like your disposal form, but specifically transferring within the unit. And for us, that might be within the university. If I transfer something like to the fine art department or to the theater, things that, you know, they end up putting into the costume shop, we use a transfer form like this internally. These are 2 steps, and these are the 2 other forms that I use most frequently. Whoops, go back. The photography and film requests. Just yesterday, I did 3 of these for when people are requesting images from your collection for publication. This is basically, it's contact information, and then the second page is, you know, what images they're using, and then it's all of your terms that they have to follow in using the image, and then credit information and signatures on the 3rd page. So this is a super handy one that I use all the time. And then again, as a research institution, I bring in 50 to 60 researchers every year. And so having a standardized form for them to fill out, and this is actually is a fillable PDF, and these are all included in your packet. This fillable PDF I have on my website, and people can just fill it out, send it to me, and that gives me a chance to prepare for their research visit. And it also provides us a way of tracking how people are using our collections in different kinds of research, whether it's for a classroom project, whether it's for a thesis, they're writing a publication, they're bringing it back to their community. This is a really important forum for us to document that process. Okay, so we are at almost exactly halfway, right? We're right on task. So we're gonna shift gears. Before we do that, I'll just throw, does anybody have any general questions that they want to throw out to the group about checklists and forms? And you can put that into the chat screen there if anybody has any comments or questions about what we've gone through so far. Doesn't show our little dot, dot, dot if anybody's typing on some of them. Well, if anybody puts anything in there, we'll address it as it pops up. Inventories are one of those tasks that probably few of us have done on a regular basis. It's such an important thing, and we are legally and professionally required to do these. And so, you know, our museum, because we have so many items, I doubt that there has ever been 100% baseline inventory that's ever been conducted for this institution with about 2.5 million objects and specimens. Each collection manages their inventorying process individually, and as we've gone into Arctos and we've implemented barcoding, that process has gotten a lot easier. And so we'll talk a little bit about that when we go along. But we all use our way of keeping track of things and monitoring their movements. But inventories, you know, it's the way that we support that public trust role that we have. AAM, of course, requires this as part of their accreditation program. The core standards for collection stewardship, that they say that museums legally, ethically, and effectively manage, document, care for, and use our collections. And it's also part of our professional practices for collection stewardship. So we need to have a system of how we record that information and inventory them and are keeping track of the movements of things. And as you know, the older your institution, the more times you've moved from one storage area to another, the more opportunities there are for things to go missing, get moved to a new place. And now that we have all of these amazing electronic ways of keeping track of our information, there's really no excuse for us to not have good physical control over our collections. There's just a lot of different ways to do it. And so when you create an inventory, before you do an inventory, I highly recommend that you take a look at the MRM5. I think we're going to send out maybe a scan of this chapter in your packet. If you don't already have it on hand, we can include this for you. And this is the chapter. I've pulled most of this information directly from this chapter that was written by Maureen McCormick. She points out that, you know, inventories and physical control of your collection, this is critical to your mission. It's tied to your fiduciary imperative to hold the collections in the public trust. We talked about that. It supports your preservation needs, because if you're inventorying, you're putting your eyes on those objects, and you can make note of what physical conservation preservation needs there are, as well as what the storage needs are. And so those are really important you know, things that you can do through this inventory process. It helps your just day-to-day management. You know, if things are where your computer says they are, that's going to make, you know, every time you pull something for a visitor or for an exhibit or for, you know, some program, it saves you time, and we all can use as much time as we can take these days. So making sure that, you know, your field and your database or on your catalog cards, if that object is in that place, then that just gives you confident in your own ability to do your job correctly and efficiently. And it also, you know, engenders that trust and that confidence of your board, of your boss, of your students, people that you're training, your volunteers. It's just, you know, it's awful to get a call or to have a visitor come in and you pull up a list of things that their grandmother donated, and you go to find them and you don't find them. That's just a situation you don't want to find yourself in. So by doing a little bit of work ahead of time, you can save yourself that problem. So just a quick poll for everybody. How many of you have actually undertaken an inventory in your experiences, either at your institution or or the one that you're at, or one of your previous ones? So go ahead and answer that question. We'll put that out there for I don't know, 30 seconds. We can, and this can be whether it's that I can show the wall to wall, that 100%. This is what we call the baseline, documenting everything in your museum, and that's things that are on temporary custody, or they're on loan, or they are there for examination. That's everything, including paperwork or photos. You could do a partial section by section, or you can do this random spot one. So
I'll end the poll now. I see 8 of you. You have 3 more seconds. 3, 2, 1. We got 1 person.
All right, good job. Everybody has undertaken an inventory of some kind before. That's great. We tend to mostly do either partial or random or spot inventories for our collection. Our museum acts as a repository for federal, state, tribal agencies. And so this is a requirement of those federal agencies. If you have any state of Alaska collections, or if you have Park Service or BLM, Forest Service, any of those, this is a requirement of having those things in your collection. So, all right. So the first step before you dive into an inventory is to make a plan. This isn't something that you're just gonna, unless you're gonna do a spot inventory. If you're coming into a new job and you don't have good intellectual control over your collection, and you want to do this as like the first thing that you do coming into that institution, it's a great way to get familiar with your collection. When I bring new students on, I give them a little practice sheet that they have to go through, and they have to find these objects in the database, and then they have to physically go out into the collection and find those objects. So that is basically a spot inventory for those things. And again, that's you can do lots of spot inventories that will eventually get you your 100% over time. So most of these things, if you're going to do a 100% baseline inventory, this is what we're going to talk about today, is kind of what process you have to go through. So you really need to figure out why you're doing this. What's your point? What's the purpose? How big of a scope you're going to have, and write it out. And you need to justify this to your boss, because you may be halting, the work that you're doing. You may need to bring in special staff or volunteers. You may need to look at your collection management plan policy to see if it gives you any guidance on this. You might have a policy of doing an inventory every year of a certain percentage. So you need to figure out what your institutional policy tells you should be doing. And then there should be something in your collection management policy to help tell you what to do if you find things that are missing or that they're undocumented. There are checklists for those things, as we've seen. If you've never done a complete inventory, you might think about aligning this process if you're looking at doing an expansion or a renovation, or maybe you're preparing for accreditation or another institutional assessment. Or maybe you're doing a digitization project. What a great time to go through and update everything. But the more information you record, the longer it's going to take. And then you need to decide what constitutes an inventory record. So what kind of information are you going to record? Like I said, the more you record, the longer it's going to take. So you might have, your minimum level of information. You want that ID number, whether it's a catalog number, accession number, whatever you use at your institution. basic tombstone information, who the artist was, what the item is, what it's made out of, the physical current location where it is, and then who's doing the inventory and the date that it was checked. You can just, do this information and you're going to be able to screen through in a much faster rate than if you're going to also do a condition assessment. Maybe you're going to take digital images of that immediately, and maybe those are going to go right into your database. If you're going to look at the dimensions, this is a great time because, again, you're putting your hands on your whole collection. So this is a great time to either confirm or record dimensions for your database, because those will be important over time. And then, you can assess the storage needs. This is how it's tied into your preservation plan, whether you need to make a new box for something, whether it doesn't have any support, it's just sitting on a shelf. Maybe it's a 2D thing that needs to have mounting hardware put on it. If the boxes have become acidified and you need to replace it. So that's, the more you do, the longer it's going to take. So you need to just make a plan and be consistent about it. So you need to ask yourself some questions before you dive in. Are you going to freeze all of your activities? Are you going to close your galleries down while you do this? If you're getting into exhibit cases, you're going to need to barricade off certain areas for security and to protect you as you're working. Can you stop doing some of your activities? Can you halt doing exhibits? Can you have a hiatus on any loans or research access into your collections? Are you going to bring on new staff, or can you do this with the staff that you have? Can you rely simply on interns and volunteers? So this is going to be different for everybody, whatever your staffing situation is at your institution. Maybe you shut down during the winter, and so this is a good time to do activities like this if you're not open to the public. So you need to really, think about this critically. If you know your own annual cycle, think about times when this collections-based work is going to be lightest, so that you can really dedicate time. Because the worst thing is starting this and then only getting partially through, and then it goes on the shelf. It's one of those things you really need to dedicate time to it and devote time and make it a priority. Otherwise, it's easy to just walk away from it and move on to your next big priority. Some other questions you need to think about: are you going to do you have catalog records in a collection management system already, or do you need to create records as you're working? Can you inventory right where the things are in situ? Can you do it right in your collections area, or do you have to take things out of the drawers, move them into another space so that you can lay them out and look at the numbers and confirm that? Are you going to include accessories like mounts and frames if you have those and you keep them with the objects? Is that going to be part of your inventory process? And if you're going to take photos as you're doing it, what kind of photos are you going to take? How many are you going to take of each? Do you need to set up extra lighting to do that? All of these things, the more you do, the longer it's going to take. So you need to, think in the scale of what you're doing. Some of the strategy that you take on as you're doing this. You might do this data entry directly into your collection management system, or you might do this in a spreadsheet. So one of the other questions I was going to ask is how many of you have Wi-Fi in your collections or exhibit spaces that would allow you to do an inventory directly into your collection management system, or into a tool that's like Google Spreadsheets or another shared document system. So go ahead and answer that question. We'll keep that open for about 30 seconds, because that'll really have an impact on how quickly and which approach you might take, and how many people can work all at once.
Okay, I see 8 of you have responded. We'll give you just a couple more seconds. 1, 2, 3. Okay, I'm going to end the poll now.
Great. All right, so you can see that most of us are lucky enough to have Wi-Fi in our collections and exhibit spaces. That's really handy because you can do this and in a much more streamlined way and share that information. You can get a grant maybe to buy a laptop and work on that laptop directly, get a nice cart and that allows you to stand up and work on your computer and work with your team. And so those are some of the questions. Are you gonna train your staff to do specific things like handle the art and one person works in the database? Are you gonna work in teams or alone? What kind of security policies do you have in place? What kind of things that are set up at your institution just in terms of how you work with objects? Do you have barcodes or other sort of inventory technology that you implement in your system? What are you going to do when you find things that don't have numbers on them, or you can't read the numbers, or they're fragments of numbers, you can't find them in your database? And then, like I said, what kinds of equipment or tools do you have in place, or other things that need to be purchased? So in the chat view, any other, so since everybody has done inventories, what other things have you thought about, or questions that you've considered as you've gone into doing inventories? Go ahead and throw any of those comments. Do you find working in teams is an effective way? And how many people are on your teams? Do you like one person, two people, three people? How many hours a day is doable for doing this kind of repetitive work? Selena says definitely teams. Yeah. I've had teams of two, one person on the computer, one person on up and down the ladder, reading off the numbers. Other people, do you have any other suggestions for us? All right, well, I'm gonna go ahead. Feel free to drop. So Teal says, small institution, so just you, yeah, and your system's outdated. So this is a great time to come up with a new system and start from scratch. It's great. It's kind of a refreshing opportunity to think about which ways you want to go with a new database, or if you're moving from a hard copy paper system to a new collection management system. It's a really good way to, like I said, come to grips with your collection and the various needs, and to set good priorities for your institution. So people are saying teams are great, evaluate the collection organization. Yeah, if the objects are happy where they're stored, that's a great suggestion there. You may be able to make a big plan for moving big groups. I've got so many Post-it notes around my collections area saying, move this drawer to there. And this is a great way to do that. Having pieces in a more accessible area. Yeah, thanks, Selena, for pointing out, if things are constantly being researched, you want to have that in an area that's easy for you to access, but also for your researchers to access. So those are all good ideas. And all organizational systems are place specific. So yeah, it's a great experience for interns to learn about collection management and build team skills and prepping. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Heather, for that comment. Those are all great. And small museum systems able to migrate to Arctos easily? Yes or no? We have. I'll be happy to talk about Arctos with anybody who's interested in that. Offline. Arctos is a great system. It has a really steep learning curve on it, though, and we are definitely trying to get more cultural collections in there. And so I will definitely be happy to chat with folks after the fact about how good Arctos is for some things and how it's challenging for other kinds. We're starting to get our fine art collection. The collection is in there, and they will be made accessible very soon. So I'm going to move on to the next step here. So the next step in, before you ever even do your inventories, you need to practice. Whoever thought you need to do practice in our job, but you need to go and practice working in different spaces, in your storage or in your exhibit space. Practice working in different collection types. You know, working with rolled textiles are going to take a lot longer than, you know, just going through a box of traps. You know, it's going to be a lot easier to see numbers and to handle them. And so you need to kind of figure out what an average time, because part of this is managing your workload, right? And making it a accomplishable task. And so getting a good sense of how much time you need to devote to this will be really important when you go to your director and say, I need $20,000 to hire temporary staff to come in and work. We need to buy a computer. And by doing that, we're going to be able to crank through this collection in 6 months, and we will be prepared to do a steps review, or we'll be ready to submit for to go up for our first accreditation, because we have really good plans for preservation, we know where things are at, so we have good physical and intellectual control over our collections. So doing this practice, it really gives you a good sense. And again, if you're gonna do photos, you know, you need to think about what kind of post photography processing am I going to do? What kind of data entry am I going to do? If I'm doing a hard copy inventory and now I need to enter that, you know, into my database, how much time does that take? I've got to prepare all these checklists for, you know, for downloading this information out of my database. You know, you got to think about it, you know, and practice and keep track of the time, because all of those things take time, and it takes time away from doing the other work that you know, we're all doing in our jobs. So this is just a screen to kind of say, you know, this is how Arctos shows our output screen. So if I put in a location code, we have a really logical, hierarchical numbering system, location code system that we're going to see in just a little bit when we go live and go out into our collections range. And so when we prepare, wow, Quebec, we go into our, my magic mouse is fighting me. If we pull up a location code, I'm going to get, so this particular location, there's 45 items in there. So I could just print this screen right here, and I can use this to compare when I go out and look and see, are all of these 45 items in that drawer? Well, we'll find out later. You could export that information into, go back again, a Google form. And I love Google Drive for doing projects like this, because again, you can create these spreadsheets, you put it into a shared folder, and then all of your teams, you know, can just access this. You're working on your Wi-Fi, on your dedicated laptop, on your cart, in your range, and your team member who's handling the objects can give you the catalog number and tell you what the item is. And, oh, is that the bird point spear that is curved and measures, you know, 7/8 of an inch, or is that the 3/4 of an inch? And so you can go through, and then the other person can inventory, or can put the date and who it was that inventoried. So that's really important. You just add that information right to that spreadsheet, and everybody, and then you've got that information right there. If you do that directly in your database, you know, we would tend to just enter that into our remarks field and say inventoried on a particular date and what the initials are. And then you don't have to transfer back and forth. So that'll save you a little bit of time. So preparing still, you know, we still have to do some more work here. You're going to, you know, look at any background information, you know, fix inconsistencies in your data. You don't want to find that an entire session hasn't been entered or hasn't been cataloged, or oh God, this field got corrupted in all of these records and you need to rebuild that information. So you need to do that kind of data entry control, quality control before you do it. If you need to design custom queries or data entry screens, if you're starting from scratch and you're wanting to just directly enter this stuff right into your collection management system, you need to create those screens. Know how to search for certain things. If you can't search for a drawer in your system, work with your OIT system to figure out how you can, or talk to your provider to see if they have these custom searches available that you need to learn how to do. Design a data entry page that you can quickly enter baseline information into. That might be something that you can do, and then you can come back and enter that other information after the fact once you build those records. You might want to design special forms and reports as part of this process. You need to definitely organize your storage area. You need to make sure that the space is clean and organized, and that you have good lighting so you can see what you're doing. You don't want to have supplies that you're tripping over. Your carts need to be able to move through there. So you just need to make sure both your collections and your staff that are working in these spaces are safe and happy as they're going through this somewhat tedious process. You need to create what we call this location authority. So if you don't have a good logical hierarchical system, do it now. Room numbers or columns or drawers or shelving. You think about how your collection is organized and create a good logical system for creating that standardized numbering system. And I always remind people, if you're using a computerized system, make sure that you use these leading zeros. So when you put your number code in there, shelf 1, if you've got more than 9 shelves, you need to make sure you put 01, 02, 03 in your computer, because when you're sorting, then you want shelf 2 to follow shelf 1, not shelf 10, because 10 will show up before 2 if your computer doesn't have those leading zeros to properly sort. So if you don't know what that means, talk to me after the fact and I can show you some really good examples of how we have fixed some problems by using those leading zeros. Come up with some written guidelines and protocols for staff. What are your handling guidelines? How do you document those objects without object numbers? Where are you going to put those? Are you going to deal with them after the fact? If you're doing data entry, do you have standardized vocabulary? Do you have a condition assessment terminology that you want to use? So all those things you're going to have to think about. How are you going to train your students, your staff? How much time are you going to put on this each day? You don't want to have all of your volunteers working for 8 hours a day doing this for 9 months. They're going to get burned out and they're not going to want to come back. So how can you set this up to really be successful? So once you've done all that, now you can do your inventory. You just need to be systematic as you're working your way around. Use those checklists, use maps, and color in those areas. Create little signs, they're post-its that you can put on things to show that you've gone through that area. Think about having a dedicated area where you can move those objects that don't have numbers, or their numbers are illegible, or they're duplicates, or they don't have any records. Don't deal with that while you're doing your inventory. Get those out so you don't go down that rabbit hole and get sucked into that problem that we've all done, or you lose your entire day trying to solve one problem. So put those someplace else, and then have a dedicated person on your team who rotates through and deals with those problem issues. Or there's one day a week that you all work on those problem things, and then have a designated time when you're transferring that information into your database, whether it's at the end of each day or at the end of each week, and you can manage that stuff. So those are some good things to think about as you're working, because you are going to find objects that don't have any records, and you're going to have records that don't have any objects. And so how you're going to deal with that stuff, how you're going to document it, you know, whether you need to go to the point of going into the art loss register. Are these, you know, high profile things and high dollar value things that you think actually may have gotten stolen? What kind of a history do you have at your institution for that kind of stuff? So, you know, that's an extreme case. Probably a lot of us are going to come across missing or empty boxes. So you need to really have a good plan for how you're going to deal with those kinds of things as they come up. And then you want to make sure that since you've spent all this time and energy on this, you want to keep it up. You want to maintain it. So, you know, do it 100% of the time, every time. Make sure that you're recording every time you move something. Write it down immediately. Limit your access to the collections. You know, I had a coworker who, you know, would bring groups of people in and look at things, and they pulled things off shelves, and then, you know, they didn't always put them back on the same shelf. So, you know, have good processes that you're doing. Create a system for doing this work that makes it easy for you and your staff, and make the time to do these inventories. So it's, you know, it's an important thing. So that's the bulk of this information. We're running a little behind, I think, but I think we just wanted to take you out into our collections range to just give you a quick view on, I printed out an inventory sheet that we can just kind of look at how one particular museum has a system, and you know, you can look at how our numbering system is. So we're going to switch computers. We're going to run down the hall to our collections range. This is your chance to get up, stretch, go use the restroom, grab a drink of water, and we will come right back to you in hopefully in 5 minutes, but maybe even fewer than 5 minutes.
So don't go far.
Yeah, don't go far. So let's see, I'm going to stop sharing this computer, right?
Sure.
And then I'm going to,
You can mute yourself there too.
screen this one. Okay, I'm going to go to here. I'm going to
mute that one first.
mute. Join the audio. Oh. Wrong button. Sorry about that. And we are going to go to that one. And I'm going to, all right, we're back on there. I'm going to go full screen. There we go. Okay. And we're going to run down the hall. And we're going to go like this.
And then you just start your video.
And I'm going to start my video. And I'm going to, and can you hear me? Am I on mute?
I don't know.
We think you can hear me. Can you text us and tell us if you can hear us? I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to do video.
Teal says she can hear you.
You can hear us. Can you see me? Great. Okay, we're going to come down the hallway, so follow me. I feel like Mr. Rogers. Now we're going to go. We're going to go down the hallway. I think as I walked slower, you did a better job. This is our hallway. Managers. Here's one of our collection managers now. Welcome to the collections range. All right, on the lights. All right. Have we hit our 2 minutes, 3 minutes?
I think so. Maybe we can ask people to take if they're back.
Yep. So, are everybody back? Yes, you're back, Selena. Yes, 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 Anjali, we're here. Perfect. Okay, thank you. So now we're in the collections range at our museum, and I'm going to show you, if you haven't been here before, I'm going to just give you a quick view down the hallway. So this is why we have never done 100% inventory that I know of for the whole museum, because we've got and we've got collection ranges on the other end. I'm breaking up. Okay, so so we have a really logical location system at our museum. So all of our numbers work on a system of parents and children, and they're all containers. So the building is a container, this room is a container, the compact storage unit is a container, each aisle, so we call these our ranges, and then within each range, we have either columns, which are a vertical set of shelves and drawers, or we have drawers, or we have cabinets. And so within each of those containers, they're all nested up one to the other. And so we're just gonna go into our mobile storage system here. And we're going into range 56 on that side, range 55 on this side. And we're gonna do a real spot inventory here. So I have printed out, you can see I've printed out from my database a list of things in a particular location, range 55, column 10, drawer 10. And we would come into our collections range on a cart like we've got now with our laptop on our Wi-Fi. And we're gonna go to range 55, column 10. So we're gonna go, we've got 11, column 10 right here. And then I'm gonna go to drawer 10, and I'm gonna take the computer and I'm just gonna lift it up right over here. And I think that you'll be able to see that we have our numbers labeled really clearly on the drawers. Can you see that? And so we've got range 55, column 10, drawer 9. So you can see drawer 8 and drawer 10 and 11. And so we've also got barcodes. So as we started barcoding a few years ago, we have all those locations barcoded. And then we can open up our drawer. And so what you want to do with your inventory is, oh, what did I do? Am I okay? Okay. Okay. So you want to go from, you want your list, but you want to go from the objects that are in your drawer. You don't want to go from your list to the objects, because you want to record what's physically here. And there we go. Thanks. So we can take our list. So my partner over here, if Della wants to grab the checklist there, so we can see on the checklist, we're gonna say, can you find UA 77211? Is that there?
Yep, that's this first one right here.
Perfect. So that's one, but it says it's an A and B. Mm-hmm. So that's interesting, because that just says 1. So we could make a note about why the database says one thing and the physical object is recorded in a different way. Then our next one is UA 95 1756 A and B. And you'll have your list recorded in numerical order, so you can work through it really logically. 1756 A and B, yep. So we check that one off, good. We've got the next one is 7854, right there, good. We're doing good here, folks. 80248,
yeah,
that's the next one. And 80249, great. So if we had checked those off, we would have seen that we had a 100% inventory of all of those pieces, and we could just go right into the database and check those all off, and we've accomplished that particular spot inventory. Now you can see I've got many shelves, and to do a task like that may take maybe we take an hour every day to work on a particular area, and then you can make little notes like this where you can put a post-it note of a particular color and say, this one's done,
this one's done, this one's done. Or you can say, you know, we did this when we were barcoding to say that we have entered a column or a shelf into the database. So lots of different ways that you can do this. And you know, we're just super excited that everybody has been here with us. I'm going to screen share back over to our last screen here to give you my contact information for after the fact. If anybody wants to get in touch with me about this, you can find me on social media, my blog, or on Instagram or Facebook with that AK Ethno Girl. And Della's got a couple things to wrap up here too.
Oh, I do. I forgot to write them down though. So thank you guys so much for joining us for our first webinar. It is noon, so I don't want to keep you. I know you all have lunch to go to. So just thank you. And if you would like to reach out to Museums Alaska, please send me an email or you can call me. You can reach out to Angie as well. And I will be sending you an email with some follow-up information that I told you at the beginning. So I think that's it. If you have any further questions, type in the chat. Otherwise, have a good afternoon.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.